to Penn Future, Penn Environment, the Monroe County NAACP, Pocono Heritage Land Trust, LEAD PA, Safe Cities, the Tacony Frankfurt Watershed Partnership, TTF, Wissahickon Trails, and thank you to all of you. We really appreciate you partnering with us. We are glad you're here to talk about the importance of local government, coming from local municipal government to county government, so your boroughs, your townships, and your county commissioners. There are a lot of things right now that are really important that can be done at the local level for the environment, democracy, justice, etc. And hopefully all of you will learn some great things tonight. And we'll have some time at the end. Jess is going to be facilitating some question and answer time. And we will hopefully provide you with some tools and resources going forward to address things in your local community. I do want to start with a brief explanation of local government positions and what things can happen at that local level. And I'm going to be passing it over to our colleague, Abby Jones from Penn Future. She is the Vice President of Legal and Policy at Penn Future. She is responsible for integrating Penn Future's legal, regulatory, and policy activities to further the organization's mission of protecting Pennsylvania's air, water, and land. So Abby, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie. And just give me a second. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, folks, just real fast, I'm going to take just a few minutes and do some level setting. So when we talk about local government, there are three types of local government that we're talking about. We're talking about the county, we're talking about municipalities, which includes your boroughs, your townships, your cities, etc. And we're talking about the school district. And so what does that mean? Very quickly, here's a little slide that shows what services each of these branches of your local government is responsible for. And you'll see how this comes into play as we go through individual examples and case studies. So at the county level, they are responsible for elections, big one, court system, social services, things like planning at some level, solid waste disposal, and stormwater. And this is just a handful of all of the things that they're responsible for. School districts, probably pretty straightforward, right? They're here to educate our school-age children and they can impose taxes. And then we have the municipality, which actually does a lot, including a lot of the environmental issues that we're going to be talking about today. And so who are your local officials, right? And you'll hear us talk about these different levels of government, different local officials as we go through the webinar tonight. But very briefly, this is, again, just very high level examples. We have elected officials and we have appointed officials. And as it relates to kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight, we have commissioners, supervisors, and council members. As your main local elected officials. You have your mayor, things like district attorneys, school board, sheriffs, judges. These are all the people that you can vote for in your local government. Now, there are some officials who are appointed then by, for example, your board of commissioners. That includes things like your planning commission, your zoning hearing board, if you have one, an environmental advisory committee, and your county solicitor. So I just wanted to run very quickly through what are the three main branches of local government, what are they responsible for, and who they are. So Katie, I'm going to send it back to you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Abby. Sorry for my technical issues this evening. The Wi-Fi connection where I am staying tonight is not great. So I do want to move on to our next panelist. Rachel Leon comes to us from the city of Bethlehem. She has been a council member there. She is, her term ends in 2026. Some of her activities include being chair of the Public Safety Committee, member of the Human Resources and Environment Committee, member of the Parks and Recreation Committee, and the Library Board liaison. Bethlehem has done some really fabulous things, especially in regards to some environmental justice issues, whether it's lead pipes and ordinances and things like that. So I'd love to kick it off to Rachel to talk a little bit about what the city's been doing.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel. I think I'm supposed to do the legal disclaimer of I don't speak for everyone on council, all that jazz. Sorry, I'm a pretty informal person, so I will endeavor to be as professional as possible, but hey, this is who I am. What you see is what you get. So I am a council person in Bethlehem, and Bethlehem has been in a kind of multi-year process of first we created with a lot of community engagement, the Climate Action Plan. And then we have also, we're in the process of implementing the Climate Action Plan. We're really at the base level. So some of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight quickly are all of the areas of the Climate Action Plan. I am so sorry. I didn't think anybody was going to be here. So if you hear background noise, I apologize. So we have broken the Climate Action Plan into multiple kind of hunks because you can't tackle environmentalism all at once. It's really everything. It's one of the reasons why I love environmentalism so much. If ever there is something that should be bipartisan, it is our environment. It's the air we breathe. It's the water we drink. It's the where our kids play. So it's very much a huge, all-encompassing thing. So we have broken into the transportation and mobility, land use and green space, local food and local waste, municipal operations, buildings, stuff like that. But all of that is viewed through the lens of environmental justice. So our biggest thing is, while we are implementing these changes, are we positive, or as positive as we can be, that the unintended consequences aren't disproportionately affecting some members of our community? And when it comes to environmental justice, that looks different based on where you're at. So like in Bethlehem, some of our most environmentally compromised land is on the south side. And we have high lead rates, high asthma rates, all these things, which in Bethlehem specifically looks like targeting the BIPOC community, targeting financially lower income people in our community, but that's what environmental justice looks like in Bethlehem. But if I hope most of us are familiar with Love Canal, that was a very different demographic that was targeted by some of these environmental issues. So Bethlehem has decided that while we are implementing all of these programs, are we sure that we're doing it in a way that is understanding of what we are facing as a community? Are we operating within our legal rights as a local government, because democracy is a thing that I hope we all care about. And we want to make sure that we are operating within our authority as a community and advocating for things at the state level if we need to see changes there. And so which is kind of how I want to caveat to the lead ordinance, because the lead ordinance is a great way of kind of showing how something that is well-intended can have unintended consequences, which is why environmental justice is so important. So we have a lead ordinance in Bethlehem that needs some tweaking, definitely. It's a very reactive instead of proactive ordinance. And since I've gotten into office, I've had multiple conversations within our administration and with some of our community partners, like our nonprofits, about how can we make this ordinance go from reactive to proactive. And what I discovered is that it is very hard to, because in making this a proactive, the best way to make this a proactive thing would be to require lead abatement in every house in Bethlehem. We would start by targeting our rentals they have to pass inspections. So they would all have to go through a lead remediation plan. In Bethlehem specifically, we see a lot of absentee landlords. So if we force them to go through lead abatement, because a child has had high rates of lead in their system, they then get basically kicked out. Because our only point of entry as a government is there a child that has high lead that was reported through the school system? That gives us the right to go in and say, you have lead in your house, you need to remediate it. That is our reactive ordinance. A proactive ordinance would say all rentals, all lead abatement right now. And the desire is to have that happen. The need is there to have that happen. But if we do that in a way that is not well thought out, what we end up doing is making our rental market inaccessible to people who are lower income. And I don't mean people who are necessarily Section 8, although we do have a lot of Section 8 housing on the South Side, which is important, but that missing middle housing that exists on the South Side, mainly in the form of rentals. And we make that inaccessible if we require these things from landlords that are not going to walk the process. They would rather just say, okay, if I will not rent to a family that has kids. So now no families, it's just single people. So I know that seems very like, that's all over the place. At least I feel like I'm talking all over the place, but that's kind of, that's the real implication of environmental justice and the lens in which we're looking at it in Bethlehem, is because there's so many things about environmentalism that are very important. I think I just ate a fly. Sorry. That are very, very important, but there are unintended consequences. The reason I bring up the lead ordinance is because it's the easy one. It's the one I'm working with. But there are other unintended consequences, like specifically in Bethlehem, we don't have single hauler trash. Single hauler trash is a huge kind of environmental justice point for me because of waste management and who ends up getting their trash collected or not. So as a city, we talked about maybe doing a plastic bag ban. And then we looked at that through the lens of environmental justice of, is this really the most important thing we could be focusing on? Because so much of this is, are we doing the real work that needs to be done? Not the low-hanging fruit, not the easy path forward. Are we doing the real work that needs to be done? And we are limited in our local communities by what we can and cannot do by state level things. But that's just why I'm so appreciative for tonight, for everyone who's showing up, because this is how we create change. People create change at the local level. People create change at the state level. So all of these things that kind of feel tense and convoluted, and do we have a right path forward? What's the best thing to do? This is how we decide what's the best thing to do. We talk to each other. We figure out what's affecting your community. It's not a broad brush that we can paint over everything. What is in fact affecting your community? How are things impacting your environment? And how can we as a community show up? How can we hold our local elected officials accountable for creating real change? And I think I'll stop there because I don't want to run over my time or anything like that. But that's kind of what's going on in Bethlehem. And if anybody is interested, I encourage you. It's bethlehempa.gov/ like climate action plan. But honestly, if you just Google Bethlehem climate action plan, it's going to come up right away. Give it a look. We spent a lot of time. There was a lot of community engagement there. And even now in our first year of implementation, we're kind of seeing, the plan was a solid plan, but it still needs tweaking, because while we're implementing it, where more community members are getting involved and saying, hey, like, this is a non-factor for us over here on the West End. Like, that sounds great, but if you implement this is how it's going to affect us on the West End. And it's like, crap, I didn't think about that. I'm a South Sider. So this is please, if you have the time, hop on Google, give it a Googs, and definitely like check it out. nothing is perfect, but it's a work in progress. It's a step in the right direction. Perfection cannot be the enemy of the good. And it's a really good jump off point if anyone in your community is looking at doing something. So that's me. I'm Rachel. If you need me, I'm around.
Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate that. I know Bethlehem has been doing a lot of work. Even since I last saw you on the last panel we were on together in the Lehigh Valley. So thank you again very much. We're going to go to another case study here. And if you've noticed, I have fixed the lighting in my hotel room so I don't look funny for all of you. But we are going to go to Winnie Okello. She's going to talk a lot more about local environmental justice and how a lot of that hinges on community action and advocacy. And when it comes to advocacy and justice and action, there are things that municipalities can do that aren't just, we're going to address this one singular issue at a time. You just heard Rachel talk about an entire climate action plan. When we're talking about issues of justice, there are also things like what we refer to as HRCs, human rights commissions, or ordinances that can be very encompassing of a lot of things, from landlord-tenant to various types of discrimination and things like that, that communities can also do to kind of dive into some of those justice issues as well. So there's a lot of options. So I am going to tell all of you that Winnie is pretty cool. She is a community advocate and organizer. She is African born. Kenya, if I'm correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. All right. She is also a civil engineer and has been working in civil engineering for several years now. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Winnie.
Thank you, family. How is everybody doing this evening? I like to be a little bit interactive. I know, webinars, it's been a long day. I've been back-to-back meetings all day, so I would like a little interaction. So if you feel comfortable, please drop in the chat. When you think of environmental justice, what comes to mind? Whatever the first word in your mind, pick one word, any word. When you think of environmental justice, what comes to mind? And I'll do like 10 seconds. Right, we got Laugh Canal, Claritin, Chester, Sam, environmental justice in PA. You cannot talk about that without addressing Chester, PA. Health, DuPont, fairness and equity, better future, air quality, health impacts, cutting neighborhoods with highways. Okay, transportation implications here. Fairness, poor neighborhoods, Covanta incinerator. Oh, that's a whole address. Okay. Having access to wonderful environmental opportunities too. Absolutely. Right. Oh, I love that. Okay. Quick reference to my shirt today. Right. Availability does not equate accessibility. And so that's pretty much like one of the anthems that I oftentimes have to remind people. Asthma and urban heat islands. Yes. Trees and animals. Redlining. See, okay, I love a smart group. Okay, and by the way, I always like to remind people, smartness does not necessarily have to equate to technical like training, right? There's a lot of social capital that oftentimes goes neglected when we prioritize technical experts. And so why do I say that, right? When we talk about environmental justice, for me, I always remind people, go back to the beginning, because context matters. One of the things I like to say a lot is words matter, language matters, and context matters. And when we look at environmental justice issues, too often we're quick to want to get to the solution without addressing how we got here and where we are and how we're going to strategically get there. So we cannot talk about environmental justice without addressing the root cause, which was environmental injustice, which before it was even called that, it was called environmental racism, which is a topic we don't often hear about in the context of environmental justice. And so if we're going to be talking about the future, right, of the future desired outcome of environmental justice, step one, acknowledge the fact that, hey, a lot of this, rather, this effort is fully rooted in environmental racism, where systematic and structural issues or context created the intended outcome, right? As a civil engineer, as a civil and environmental engineer, when I was doing some research into this efforts after I graduated, it was interesting to me how, as I was looking towards some of the writings, how literally like some of the quotes were, that were in reference to some of the engineers and designers of highways, when they were like, oh, we're killing two birds with one stone. We are creating highways and we're getting rid of undesirable populations. You wouldn't think to connect those two things together, especially if we're oftentimes taught to be optimistic, give people the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is, if you do a lot of this work, you recognize the issues that we see today, they're not accidental. The outcomes of today's disparities, they're by design. And I think until we get very intentional about addressing, okay, how did we get here? Understanding that it was not an accident, understanding that it was very intentional. And for us to get to a restorative, just, transition, we have to be equally intentional about addressing the historic harm that perpetuates present day issues so we can have changes for our future outcomes, right? So it's always addressing those three parts, right? Past, present, and future, understanding they always coincide in the present, and the things we do in the present affects the future, and also acknowledging the past. So tying that to community advocacy, which is a lot of the work that I do in this effort, I am big on education and awareness, right? Because sometimes people don't know what they don't know until you tell them, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. And in the responses that I got when I asked about the environmental justice idea, I am glad that people gave me a wide range of issues, right? From, health equity concerns to transportation equity or inequity issues, to social issues and economic issues such as redlining, right? Where too often people are so used to being siloed, right? The political system oftentimes requires things to be very siloed. And I'm talking politics in general, not necessarily being partisan, regardless of what side you're on, right? Politics is in everything. And for those people who often, I used to be that person who was like, oh man, I don't care for politics. But as I got older, I realized you can choose not to do politics, but politics will do you. Regardless of what you do, you can be like, I don't like politics. All right, cool. But politics, it's in your water, it's in your air, it's in your food, it's in your education, it's in your healthcare. It's in anytime you take a breath in, if you're able to, and you breathe out, politics is in that too, right? And so if we're going to be talking about environmental health, environmental safety, environmental awareness, how we educate our young folks, because let's be honest, the rising generation, we're leaving to them a pretty tough bag of things to carry, especially when it comes to the environment, and not just the upcoming generation. When we look at it on a global scale, I like to talk things on a global perspective: global issues, local solutions, global impact. Understanding that what we do locally affects others nationally, statewide, as well as internationally. And so we don't have to wait for decades to see the impacts of environmental impacts, right? Whether it's clean water, clean air, or even noise pollution. A lot of people don't often think about noise pollution or even light pollution. I know for me, sometimes when I go to other places, oh, somebody has something. Hi. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know sometimes like when I go to certain places and I'm able to see the stars clearly in the sky, I am in shock. I'm like, wow, what? The stars are so beautiful. And I think to myself, oh yeah, like that is a result of how urbanized, and sometimes the light pollution that we allow to occur. And one of the things people forget, or rather I didn't know until a couple of years ago, where Sister Rafika kind of was like, hey, did you know, when we're talking about this issue of environmental, degradation and the Harrisburg Comprehensive Plan, which is kind of how I got even more so into the whole education and awareness and civic engagement and advocacy efforts for community, for municipal level advocacy for here, Greater Harrisburg area. She was like, hey, first of all, how many of y'all out there know that Pennsylvania actually has its own constitution? I wish we could see hands, right? Yeah, I am pleasantly surprised anytime I ask that, and people are like, huh, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, the fact that this is not taught in our academic setting and in a way that contextualizes Pennsylvania issues to Pennsylvanians and allows our students to be actively engaged in our civic education process, in a very practical manner, to me, I'm like, that's problematic, right? If we're saying that civic engagement and civic education is important, it has to, be ingrained in the K through 12 process. And so, the reason I bring that up is, even at work, yes, I do work for the state, but that's a sidebar today. Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm glad that it has finally gotten a lot more recognition is the Commonwealth's own constitution. Here in Pennsylvania, our constitution, Article 1, Section 27, literally calls this out, right? It's the Natural Resources and Public Estate, section where it says the people have a right, and again, it's all people, right? Assuming it's implied here, all people of Pennsylvania have a right, fundamental, inherent, built-in, right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment, right? Understanding that Pennsylvania's public natural resources are common property of all people, including generations to come. Okay, and as trustees of these resources, those who happen to be trustees who fit that definition of that, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people. And when we talk about this, to me, I'm like, this is powerful, right? When you consider things that are considered a fundamental right, clean air, pure water, and the preservation of natural, scenic, and historic and aesthetic values of the environment. And I am glad that they included future generations, because to me, I learn a lot through proverbs, African proverbs, right? Or just indigenous proverbs. And one of my favorites is the one that states that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our descendants, right? Too often we don't think about it in that context. It's cool that like our ancestors leave us this land, and we do the best we can while we have it. And if we forget to use it in a manner that is responsible for those who are leaving it to, think about it, 50, 60, 100 years from now, how would we do things differently? If your children, think about it, right? Because I think sometimes like people have to personalize the thing to understand why it matters, right? And so, yeah, I just kind of wanted to take a moment and allow us to like meditate on that when it comes to, education, awareness, and advocacy on a municipal level. It's not always about beating down the doors of city council or the school board or whoever. Sometimes it's about organizing the constituents to let them know, hey, do you have a document that you can use to go back to your, the folks you have voted into power to say, hey, in this comprehensive plan, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. We have yet to see this. How can we work together to make sure that it becomes a reality? And I will close with one of my favorite, Bell Hooks quotes. Again, when you talk about environmental justice or justice in general, right? It's important to understand that justice demands integrity. It is to have a moral universe, not only to know what is right or wrong, but to put things into perspective, to weigh things. Justice is different from violence and retribution. It requires complex accounting. And that I have come to know to be very true in all things, especially when dealing with environmental justice. Thank you so much. I will drop links in the chat for y'all. If anything, reach out. Let's connect. All things at Miss Winnie O across the social medias. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winnie. We really appreciate it. We're going to take a turn, but it is one with a clear turn signal, right from justice to democracy. Hopefully all of you know how important our democracy is to getting folks into office who can do these good things, for people who are community advocates to go talk to convince to do good things that we need to have done. So in terms of democracy and how we want to protect it and how it kind of works and how local county government actually impacts our day-to-day democracy, or election to election, if not day-to-day, but there's a lot more than just election days behind the scenes. I'd like to introduce Laura Burke. She is a county commissioner in Blair County, in the middle of the state. She is vice chair of the Board of Commissioners. She serves as the liaison for court-related offices, and a few other offices. There's lots of offices in county government, from tax assessment to children and families and public defenders. And that's just stuff she's involved in. She herself is also a lawyer, and has practiced, if I'm correct, family law mostly in the past, a few other types as well. And she is here to talk about county commissioners and their impact on our democracy. Laura?
Thanks, Katie. So I do want to caveat a little some of what I'm going to say tonight, because I'm probably going to share some stories and use the term, and I'm going to be referring to the Board of Elections and the commissioners. Some counties in Pennsylvania have an executive and council format, so the exact people doing these roles maybe have different titles in your county, but in general, I'm talking about the executive function of county government across the Commonwealth. So counties do run elections. We run the elections on behalf of the federal government and the state government. And then, of course, at the local level, we facilitate all of your local elections as well. And we do that with guidance from the State Department of State. But there are areas in the statute where we have to exercise discretion. And certainly over the administrative things that happen in our counties, we have control over the employees that we have in our elections offices and how they're doing their jobs to a large extent. So in years when we are not on the ballot, we sit as the Board of Elections, and depending on the size of the county, your commissioners may be more hands-on or may delegate some of those duties. In a lot of the smaller rural counties, which we have a lot of those in Pennsylvania, we really are hands-on and in there working side by side with the employees on and around election day. But one of our main roles is hiring the elections director and overseeing them from an HR standpoint. So, the main person in charge of how those elections is run. And then also, I was reminded in Abby's introduction about the different types of local government. We also appoint our county solicitor. So when we're receiving information about how to interpret the state statute on in the election code, the solicitor is the one giving us that information. So that can be important too, not just the election staff themselves. So we provide the funding at the local level. We did recently start getting state grants for election integrity and to help out, but really that was the first time. Before that, it was all pretty much local funding that went to running those elections. So really it depended on your county commissioners to choose how well they wanted to fund all the infrastructure around elections. We sign all the contracts regarding election equipment, polling locations. So choosing if your polls are on bus routes or have access to, mass transit, making sure those locations are ADA accessible, those sorts of things. The printing of the ballots, making sure mail-in ballots get mailed out in a timely manner, making decisions regarding drop boxes, whether you have them in your county, where they're located, some of the parameters around that. There's still a lot of controversy and some lawsuits going on related to that, but that is one thing in 2020 that was really a big issue for us and varied quite widely from county to county, depending on who had been put in those positions. And then finally, really making the ultimate decisions on whether some of your votes count. So things like when we're canvassing the mail-ins, are ballots signed? Are they dated? That sort of thing. Like, how are we verifying those? Again, still like evolving in terms of Department of State and what the courts are telling us we have to do. But when we don't have clarity on those issues, we're the ones making those decisions. And then one other thing I wanted to note for you was provisional ballots. So there was a lot of confusion, particularly in 2020 about this with COVID and mail-in ballots and confusion about dates and deadlines being extended because of COVID. So it isn't always as huge of an issue as it was in 2020. But that year, I think in my county, we had around 250 provisional ballots on the general election day. And the Board of Elections actually sits down a few days after election day and goes through all of those and decides one by one whether to count them or not. So that whole process is really informed by, the people who are on the Board of Elections, the commissioners, information our solicitor is giving us about his interpretation of the law, and then just our judgment on whether each particular ballot should count. And we did have a situation where I disagreed with our solicitor. We, kind of all consulted, and we ended up overruling what our solicitor had initially told us. He told us that ultimately he was comfortable with the decision we made, but we counted about 200 ballots that if we had just followed, the initial advice he gave us, we would not have counted. So it can make a difference when you're talking about these elections, particularly local elections that are really decided by very few votes in a lot of instances. Who you have on your Board of Elections can really make a difference. I think one final thing I did want to point out, the Board of Elections ultimately can be responsible if we do identify instances of fraud. Now, I have never seen any sort of like widespread issues, but we did have like one or two ballots where we couldn't verify that the person was the person that was supposed to have filled out the ballot. So they're responsible for deciding the point at which we refer things to the district attorney if we are suspecting that someone has tried to commit fraud in voting. So that's another kind of important thing that we do as the Board of Elections. And that is, I think, pretty much everything I had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. We've learned over the years that a lot of folks don't realize their county commissioners are kind of in charge of those elections at the local level. It's very, very important. I am actually going to turn it back over to Abby with actually another local case study and some further information there. So Abby, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And thank you, everybody who's talked so far. I mean, I think we're hearing really great things. And what I hope to do to kind of bring us home is to wrap it up. I again have a PowerPoint, so bear with me. I love these. Nobody wants to be looking at my face for 10 minutes. So local government, right? What do? They have the authority for our health, safety, and welfare of our community and our environments. And we've heard numerous stories about how that plays out and how it really does matter. The people that are elected make a difference, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 4 examples of how we've actually seen this in practice all over. And then I'm going to sum it up by like talking about how we all can get it involved in our local government and why that actually matters. So my first example regards open space preservation. And this is in Monroe County, but I know there are other counties that have done this. I think Adams County, I think Carbon County. But in this case, the county did 2 things. One thing is they had an open space bond. So this is actually a voter-approved referendum that got $25 million to support open space planning and open space preservation. And so the open space plan that they developed was passed in 2001, and that really established a framework for protecting, conserving, and enhancing open space throughout the county. And the way this worked is that the county then provided each municipality with the financial incentives to develop regional multi-municipal plans. And multi-municipal plans are something that we really encourage because it allows a regional, in some cases, watershed approach, and we can talk about that, why that's important. But it really opens up a lot of avenues for your local government to act with your best intentions, with the community's best intentions, with the environment's best intentions in mind. And so this was a huge success. It's still making many preservation opportunities available in Monroe County still to this day. But as of 2010, so in 10 years, basically, this open space plan and open space law in Monroe County resulted in over 12,000 acres of open space, much of it public, 6,000 acres preserved through ag land preservation. And it also leveraged an additional $75 million through state funding. So this is just one way in that your local government can act on your behalf to do the things you want to, in this case, preserve open space. The next example is a more recent example, and this comes from just maybe a month ago. We're talking about riparian buffers here, and Coolwall Township, also in Monroe County, just revised its stormwater management ordinance. So just to back up a little bit, an ordinance is basically the local government regulation. It's called an ordinance, it's not a statute, it's not a law. Well, it's technically a law, but it's called an ordinance. So when you hear us talk about that, that's what we're talking about. In this case, the township, through its stormwater management, increased riparian buffer. So that strip of land around wetlands, lakes, ponds, vernal ponds, and streams, they increased it to 300 feet. And this is huge. And I'll talk about this in another case too, but right now, we are in constant debate over what a riparian buffer should be, how big it should be. And what happened here is the township stepped up and stepped in. It heard from its community members and it acted appropriately to take meaningful steps to protect the environment. And so what's important here is this most likely applies to large scale development. It's unlikely to impact residential property owners. And that was a very thoughtful consideration when they were drafting this provision. And we know that riparian buffers protect stormwater, protect from stormwater flooding, pollution. It also protects drinking water quality. So it's saving the township, the county in some cases, money from things like dealing with flood waters, dealing with increased drinking water treatment. And frankly, it costs the township nothing to do this. So this is again where we're seeing your local government responding to community input at public meetings and to actually doing something that changes and protects our environment. Oh, this should say example 3. I don't think I've changed all my examples as I added one today, but example 3, logistics facilities. We all have been hearing a lot about these, traditionally called warehouses. The warehouses of today are no longer the warehouses of past generations, and we need our zoning ordinances to reflect that. So in this case, like Rachel said, we're trying to be reactive instead of proactive, and there are multiple municipalities throughout. I've mostly been focused on the Lehigh Valley and the Poconos that are undertaking revising their zoning ordinances to get ahead of these logistics facilities to make sure that they are doing what they need to do to protect their communities and their environment. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of the municipalities are looking at how they're defining things like warehouse, distribution center, truck terminal. It really does make a difference when you're looking at your zoning and what is or is not allowed in a certain property. Another thing that we've been seeing townships do is to make sure that you are zoning these logistics facilities away from sensitive community and environmental areas. So away from your special protection waters, away from your schools, away from your residential development, and near the major highways. And this can be accomplished in any number of ways. I know Pocono Township did a zoning overlay. So they're really trying to get out ahead of this and be thoughtful, because once a proposal for a logistics facility is in front of your municipality, they can't do anything to really stop it. Maybe in rare cases, but if it is included in the zoning definitions, if it is included in the zoning district for that property, there's oftentimes not much you can do at that point. So again, trying to be proactive instead of reactive here. We're trying to change the ordinances before these developments come in. And this is important because these facilities not only are huge, million square foot facilities, paving over all of that, in many cases along the banks of streams, many cases taking away trees, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of daily truck trips. And so when we're talking about communities that are overburdened by air quality pollution, thinking of you, the Lehigh Valley, this is one way to kind of mitigate or reduce increased air pollution, truck traffic issues, water pollution, and we're also talking noise and light because these things are operating 24/7, 365. And then example 4, I'm going to go back to the environmental justice, and I can't say anything better than Winnie said on this, but I just wanted to give an example of where the city of Philadelphia attempted to step up and fill gaps left by the state and federal government. So in 2022, City of Philadelphia established an Environmental Justice Advisory Commission, and this is to help the mayor, the city council, and the Office of Sustainability identify the problems, come up with hopefully solutions, and make recommendations to move forward. And in 2022, the Community Health Act was also introduced, and this would require the local Department of Health to identify EJ's communities, require community input, and most importantly, to require cumulative impact analysis for new projects. And it has some teeth to it, and that's really what we're looking for here. It empowers that Department of Health then to mitigate the impacts before a project can proceed. And so we're seeing intentionality, which is what Winnie was talking about. We're really seeing a municipality, a local government, trying to be thoughtful and responding to, again, the needs of the community and to fill gaps that are left if the state government or the federal government doesn't quite have their act together. And we've, again, very quick examples, we've been seeing this in a number of issues, including waste issues, fracking issues, those kinds of things. Again, there are only so many things that a local government can do to protect our health, safety, and welfare. They can't do what, for example, DEP is already doing, but there are places that they can step up. And so I hope these examples have shown where, and just to talk about what the other speakers have talked about, where it matters who is elected. We want to be proactive instead of reactive, and we want to be intentional at the local government level. And so how can we move the needle with local government, right? One way to do that is to attend municipal meetings. Not only do you then know what's coming down the pike, but you get to learn who your local decision makers are. And this matters. These are your neighbors. These are your teachers. These are your, they're the people, you know, Mr. Rogers, who are the people in the neighborhood. They're the people who are running your local government, right? And don't be afraid to, once you've kind of figured it out, engage in that local decision-making process. If you think there's something that's going to come up that you want to talk about, look for that notice of maybe a public meeting or a public hearing in your local newspaper. And if you feel strongly about something, become a party to those hearings. If you're a neighbor, if you have some kind of interest that could be impacted by your local government's decision, you can be a party. And you know, we're coming out with a guidance document that helps kind of explain the local decision-making processes and how you can get involved. So stay tuned for that. But like, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is really a critical part of the process. Public comment, public engagement with government is a necessary part of the process. So please try not to shy away from that. I know it can be overwhelming. Another way that we can get involved and try to engage with local government is to write letters to the editors and op-eds. I know Penn Future and CVPA, we do a lot to help encourage and offer guidance to community members on how to do this. But this is really an opportunity for you to highlight emerging threats and offer solutions. It's also really a chance for those underrepresented interests and communities to really have their voices elevated. And then hopefully, to bring it all home here, the best way you can engage with your local government is to get out and vote. I have seen elections where they have been decided on a handful of votes, 5 votes, 12 votes, 20 votes. So your voice matters so much more at the local government level. And so it's one of the most direct impacts our opportunity to vote can have on our everyday lives and on our communities. And again, this includes things like elections, school boards, the governing boards that oversee how your community is developed. You want to ensure that you are electing folks who share your values, who come up with proactive led ordinances and really care about the community. And so I know we're coming up on 7 o'clock, so I just want to end with saying that local government matters for our environment and democracy matters for our local government. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Abby, Winnie, Laura, and Rachel for speaking to those issues tonight. We're really, we know that this is the tip of the iceberg, right? There are so many ways that local government plays a role in our lives, especially when it comes to supporting our right to vote and democracy, as well as the environmental issues we mentioned tonight, and pushing for equity and justice. Whether it's climate action plans to help a local government become more resilient and less dependent on fossil fuels, or protecting residents from harmful pollutants like lead, or protecting our local land and water. Our local elected officials, your neighbors, play a huge role. We're really excited to keep diving into this topic. Like Abby said, we're going to be releasing a guide to help showcase really how to get involved in your municipal government, just like the steps that Abby outlined. And of course, as noted during multiple parts of our program, and we will continue to underline this, voting is the first step to ensuring we have the right people in office to make sure we're protecting our environment, pushing for equity and justice in all realms, and protecting our right to vote. So be sure to head to the polls or drop off your ballot on November 7th this year, and which is less than 6 weeks away. And with that, if that concludes your time with us tonight, that is our program. We're heading into our question and answer portion, but we recognize and respect folks' time. This will be recorded and the recording will be sent around. Thanks to those that have submitted questions already. And I want to make sure that you all are remembered. There is a chat function, yes, but we want to make sure we don't miss your question. So there's also a question and answer function. It's the to speech bubble icon. So first up, Rachel, I know that you had something to hop off to. I want to make sure you're with us still. Perfect. Great. Rachel, one of the first questions that came through was in relation to the plastic bag. Oh, sorry to catch you mid-bite. I'll speak slowly so you can finish that bite there. Tinku had asked about your plastic bag ban, and if you could clarify again why Bethlehem might not have decided to proceed with the plastic bag ban. Was it because you had mentioned there was a justice issue there, and I think we were looking for clarification.
So I want to say that it's not that we are not proceeding with it. It's a matter of timing. But also, first of all, shout out to Winnie, full chest saying what you were saying, because sometimes when you're in politics, you have to walk the line. But you know, taking off politician Rachel hat and putting on activist hat, and those are two very different hats, and you have to speak specifically in those two very different spaces. When we think about history, when we talk about history, we can't look up and idolize. We can't look down and demonize. You got to look it square in the eye. And sometimes, especially in the realm of environmental justice, we can get a little bit in our feels about accurately talking about history. And this isn't demonizing anyone. Nobody on this panel was part of the redlining. Nobody in this panel was part of the bridge constructions that kept buses out of suburban areas. That's not us. These are times that we can look back at history accurately and say there was a lot of good and a lot of bad, because that is the human condition. Anyway, sorry, tangent. So with the plastic bag ban, because of Bethlehem specifically, how we collect trash, doing a plastic bag ban right now would be like picking out wallpaper and art decorations for a house when the foundation isn't even laid. Because of how we collect trash, we have got like 17, 18 different haulers hauling every single day, hauling multiple times a day. Our trash collection is probably the biggest issue in Bethlehem. And when we talk about timing and the unintended consequences of what we do, if we say as a city that we are going to settle for the plastic bag ban because it is the low-hanging fruit that we can quickly do, instead of tackling the real problem that affects people's lives environmentally every day, which is the trash can, what we are conceding is that we're willing to do the easy because it's easy, not that we're willing to do the hard in spite of it being hard. It's the most impactful thing. It's what the community has asked for. It is what the community needs. But when we say, I hear you, I see you, but also this is going to look good for me in my political career because I accomplished this thing. That is the absolute opposite. And the unintended consequence is the message we are sending, not saying, we are not saying, sorry, I feel like I'm in my preacher mode right now. We are not saying you don't matter, but the unintended consequence of what we are saying is that you don't matter. When our children have to walk by trash on the streets because we have not sorted how we are going to collect our trash, and we have the audacity to say the most important thing in Bethlehem is those plastic bags. That is wrong. And that is not to say that plastic bag bans are ineffective or don't work. It's about understanding your community. If we were a community that had waterways that were bogged down by trash and it was affecting our community to that extent, yes, definitely. But I would contend that in Bethlehem, the pollution in our waterways comes from our fishermen unintentionally, microplastics and stuff like that, not water, but not plastic bags. So it's not that we are not going to go forward with it. It's just that as a city, and I don't speak for the whole city, but my small role, I will not worry about picture frames and wallpaper while my house is on fire and our house is on fire, and we have to put out that house and shore up that foundation, and then we can get to that. That's kind of the very long and short of it. It's just inopportune timing. And what are we saying when we choose to settle for low-hanging fruit, when there is real work to be done, and that can be done, and that needs to be done? And if we do the low-hanging fruit, what are we saying to the people that are telling us day in and day out, my children are walking to school in trash? My son walked to school in the same trash heap that I walked to school in 30 years ago. Like, what are we saying to our children subliminally when they are walking through trash? And we're going to say, listen, I know that you're having to walk through trash to get to your school, but those plastic bags, that's the worst. So
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate your clarification on that and raising those critically important points. And I see our panelists agree. I want to bring it back. So folks were asking a lot of great ordinances or projects or resolutions were brought up tonight and referenced. And folks are wondering, I have an idea, but I want to hear from our panelists. How do they find out if their community has those things in play or not? How do they know if they have to advocate for that? And I'm curious if one of our panelists wants to take a stab here. Winnie,
I'll hop on that.
Yeah.
I would say, number one, have at least one friend who's actively involved, so you don't have to be the person who needs to know everything. I always tell people, just if you have a good network of like being connected to the people who are oftentimes most plugged in, they will let you know, even if you're a hermit like me. So you show up for the things. I think that's number one. Understand what your emotional labor capacity is. I think when you're looking, because it can be very emotionally intensive. So you also have to take care of yourself. So how do you, right? Because I tell people, before you go out there, you got to take care of, put your own seatbelt first. Because if you're really doing this work, it's a lot of emotional labor. So connect with at least one person. And I will do 2 plugs. One, the PADEP, obviously I'm not speaking on behalf of the department, let me be very clear, but PADEP has the Environmental Justice policy that's currently on interim final up for the second round of public comments. I know we gave public comments last year, but this is another round. If you happen to have missed the public commenting session last year, I'm telling y'all right now, it's out. I dropped the links in here several times, and I believe they can share, the coordinators can share as well when they follow up. And the other thing is, I know DEP has they have the statewide newsletter. So to me, I know for me, for all things, at least in EJ Core, I'm usually stalking DEP newsletter. I subscribe to it. I used to join the public meetings even before I joined them. And yeah, so go to at least one meeting and make one friend, and they will usually connect you to the other things. And also check out your local like Facebook groups, because I know I post a lot on like our Harrisburg Community Working Group page, like just like whatever it is, like, you know, you don't have to overextend yourself, but you got to put yourself out a little bit in whatever spaces you're comfortable, whether it's on Facebook, making a friend, or, you know, the, you know, state or whatever official sites. Like, tune into at least one. They usually end up connecting you like with other organizations. So that's my 2 cents on it. So yeah,
Thank
public
you,
comments,
Winnie.
submit them and stay engaged.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
just echo
Yeah.
what Winnie is saying and say that it really is important for you to just get to know your local elected officials, right? So I know the township managers in many of the townships up in the Poconos have been invaluable resources for me personally to say, hey, what is going on, right? So don't be afraid to pick up the phone. Don't be afraid to go to meetings, raise your hand during public comment. They won't always answer your question, but you're at least establishing who you are and what your concerns are, and then you can follow up separately. So I would say that is like kind of the first step. And then I will also say that once you kind of have a handle on what is or is not going on in your local government, there are options, there are model ordinances out there that you could offer up. You could just say, hey, township next door to us is doing a great job of this. Why aren't we doing what they're doing, right? You don't have to know how to write an ordinance. You don't have to know really what the ordinance says in order to get it before your planning commission, your environmental advisory committee, your board of commissioners, your board of supervisors, your city council, right? Just start that conversation, I think, is sometimes the hardest step.
Can I add a little bit to that as well?
Come on in, guys. Yeah, Rachel and then Laura, go for it.
I will say also, find a city similar to yours. I had to pop off for a little bit in the middle, so I'm not sure what I heard, or I'm not sure what I missed when I was gone, but find a city similar to yours. If you don't find anyone helpful in your city, find another third-class city, first-class city, because one thing that we faced a lot in Bethlehem is that people look to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and what they're doing, and what they have the legal right to do is very different than what we have the legal right to do. So there's kind of that. So if you want to know how to advocate appropriately at the like your local level and what you can do, just find another city that's similar to yours and see what they're doing in a similar city. You don't have to look up the third-class city code and figure out what's our legal right. Just look up, hey, Bethlehem is a third-class city. Most of us are third-class cities. So if you're in here and you're in a city that's not Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, chances are you're a third-class city. Look at what Bethlehem is doing, because we probably have the same structure. And I will shoot you any ordinance you want to know. You know, not here to just help Bethlehem. We're here for a good time, not a long time. So find a similar style of city, so that when you're advocating, you're not wasting your time, but more importantly, you're not exhausting that emotional capital that Winnie was talking about, because this is extremely draining work. And I mean, I don't want to say it should be, but we are dealing with the future of our planet. This is heavy, heavy, heavy stuff. And it takes a level of bravery and steadfastness to do this. So many hands make light work. Find somebody who's already done it. Copy and paste that stuff. Smack it into the council.
I was just going to give like a short little tip. Like if you go to someone and say, I'm interested in this issue, can you help me with this? And you're maybe talking at the county level. I'm always, the county doesn't do very much of this stuff, but I'm always going to try to connect you with the person who can help you. So don't be afraid to start with the person you know who's in whichever government, and ask the follow-up question. Well, if you aren't the right person, who should I ask? Because we love to connect people, and that makes us feel like we're helping. So
I love it. Yes. Thank you, Laura.
And if I
Yeah,
may,
Whitney.
I
Yeah.
put it in the chat, right? Because for me, because I'm always pulled into 10 different directions, right? And you can't always make all the meetings. If you're active, like there's like a school board meeting, the meeting, a city council meeting, a zoning hearing, there's a lot of them happening at the same time. So I know from me, I usually, if your city has this, if they have like social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I usually follow a lot of our YouTube channels. Even like the Senate and Congress, for a lot of their hearings, they have them popping up on YouTube. So you can find out a lot about what's going on, whether it's your school board hearings or your commissions or any of those, if they have a YouTube page that you can watch. And if they don't, I think that's an opportunity to advocate for your community and be like, hey, we're busy, we're working, we can't make it at this time that you currently have it scheduled. How can you, help us so that we can show up? I know even our prison board usually has their meetings like on a Wednesday afternoon. I can't make it in person, but I could probably call in sometimes. And again, right, that's the other thing. The reason I mentioned prison board is because in a lot of my EJ analysis, I would say the incarcerated population is actually one of the most underutilized and under-tapped EJ advocacy cohort, especially when we're talking about air quality, water quality issues, just HVAC, just understand health equity, right? Mental health, because we understand mental health, environmental justice, and really a lot of the funding coming down that are saying, hey, there's the Justice 40 funds, IIJA. There's a lot of funding that's coming that if you are innovative in how you apply for them, there's a lot of opportunity to be able to serve some really underserved, disenfranchised communities. Incarcerated populations being included in that, which we don't often talk about. So I'm a quick plug on that one too.
No, I appreciate it, Winnie. As we're heading off of incarcerated populations, I want to talk about voting really quick, which I know is a huge piece to talk about there as well. Laura, we've got a couple of questions here that are like, okay, how do I find out who's on my ballot? How do I get people registered? How do I get my mail-in ballot? Laura, can you help us out with that one?
Sure. The easiest way to find out if you're registered, I believe, and I'm hoping I'm getting the right URL, but it's votespa.com. But I think if you do votespa.org, it also comes up. And if you have like your basic information, you can look yourself up to see, or anyone whose information you have, you can look yourself up to see what your status is. You can register online. We also have a lot of libraries have like the actual papers. If you're not like an internet person, or people who aren't necessarily connected to the internet, usually libraries are a good source for the paper documents, but they can also be picked up in your local elections office. And that website will have like all of the basic like deadlines and information. I'm gonna miss, like, I should have had like the actual day. I believe it's early in October is I think it's October 7th, probably a month before this next election is the deadline to register. And then up to 2 weeks before, there is a deadline that's 14 days before, and I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head, but then a week before is the last day to request a mail-in. You want to know those deadlines. I do think if you wait a long time to request a mail-in, you may want to just go in person, request it, fill it out, and turn it back in instead of trying to rely on the mail. We want to make sure your ballot gets in on time. But there is also the option of voting in person. Did I cover everything? I'm sorry.
You did. I think the last thing in the common question I hear from folks is like, how do I find out who's on my ballot, especially when it comes to these local elections, excuse me. So correct me if I'm wrong, a county website is one of the good places we can go, right?
Yes, yeah, we will publish a sample ballot. And it's once it's certified by the state. So usually it ends up being pretty close to election day. But they do get posted publicly so you can see everyone. And they also do have lists, I think, of everyone who petitioned and got on the ballot. It just won't look formal. So contacting your local elections office is the best way to find out, like right in your little municipality. Well, it may not be little, it may be big, but in your local municipality, who is on the ballot.
Thank you, Laura. Did any of our other, I think we covered it. Wanted to make sure no other panelists wanted to hop in there. Okay. While we're on the topic of government, I saw some brave souls in the chat wondering how they could get more involved. And so if folks are interested in running for local government, I got to give a quick plug here for one of our co-sponsors, Lead PA, the organization. If you're just at least remotely curious about what running for local government entails, what does that look like? What is the time commitment? Not sure why my light keeps turning off, but we definitely need wonderful neighbors involved in these efforts locally. And so I definitely encourage Lead PA as one of the key places to go, just even if you're curious about what it entails. Any of the panelists have anything to add of like how to learn more or what to do if you're interested in learning, running for local government?
Google it. No, I'm just kidding.
I would say contact your local party of whichever party you're registered with. Usually they have pretty good resources.
I would agree with Laura. My running experience was very difficult. I didn't reach out because I was supposed to announce it in like March, and I decided like February 26th that I was going to run. Don't do that, please. It's very difficult to do it that way. There are a lot of people that want to help. Please don't try to do it alone. Reach out. That's why I said give it a Google. How do I run for local office? I'm sure something will come up, but they've put interesting resources in the chat. And seconding what Laura said, there is support out there that will help you through the process of doing it. I think the most important thing, and this isn't, sorry that keeps happening. I'm totally outside, so the light's gonna go on and off. And I'm sorry I'm pacing. This stuff gets me amped, so I can't stay still. But like, I think before learning about collecting signatures and filing reporting dates or whatever all that stuff is called, make sure you sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation with your family. This is going to require so much more of you than you believe, but it is worth it, especially if you can stay true to who you are as a person. So factor that into your equation when you're thinking about, I want to run for local office. Is like, one thing I say is, I will try to clean this up. I was in the military. My mouth is foul. There's two types of people who run for local office. I'm being very general right now. One is people who want to be in local office because they want to eventually get that high paycheck. You're getting like nothing at the city council level, but a senator, that makes money. Or the people who love their community so much that they're willing to get the dog poop kicked out of them every single day and still show up the next day to do it. It is not easy, but if you're true to yourself and you love your community, people are going to show up for you, just like you show up for them.
Thank you, Rachel. Winnie, I see you. You're thinking of something.
Yes. Right. Because I haven't run for office, so I can't speak on that. But I will say, as a constituent who is very keen on being very engaged with those who I and my community elevate to the prestigious position of advocacy, folks to speak on our behalf, as are the folks who elect them into power, the people who loan them the opportunity to execute that power. I appreciate that Rachel has reiterated something that I find really, really important, which is integrity. We may not always hear it being said so blatantly, but regardless of whether you're left, right, independent, medium, green, whatever one chooses to kind of say, this is the platform that I'm running on. Whatever the thing that you tell the people that you're going to do for them, one thing that I've come to realize is that no matter who's paying you, integrity matters in this game of politics. And it's not about who's giving you the most money, because eventually, at the end of the day, you have to sit with your own thoughts. You have to sit with, oh, these people voted me in because they expected X, Y, Z, and I turn around because of whatever reasons I'm giving them 1, 2, 3. And that really says something about if you have long-term ambitions and what that would look like. And I think people need to vote with that vision and understanding in mind. Truly understanding that power is to the people, for the people, by the people when it comes to voting and civic engagement, because civic engagement is how we wield power in this game of politics, right? Because those three things go together: civic engagement, power, and politics. And if you're gonna find yourself in that space, all I ever ask for anyone who wishes to do so, please remember that integrity absolutely matters in that, and how you deal with people, how you deal with organizations, how you deal with the commitments that you make to those who entrust in you. That power and position is so important. So remember us while you're making those decisions for those 10, 20, 30-year programs. Please and thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Winnie. I see the time, and we are going to close at 7:30 tonight. I really, really appreciate the panelists' time tonight and sharing their wisdom and education here. There's so many questions I wish we could get to. And so I see a couple of very specific ones. I want to follow up with some folks about those key aspects here. I see an interesting one that Philip. Yeah, Winnie, what's up? Oh, don't worry.
No, I'm asking, can somebody clarify for people who want to run emphasis on women? Can you clarify what you meant by that, please? There's a chat, Adrian Young, if you're still here.
Yeah.
I think that's it. No, because I know how I am taking it, but I want to be clear that it's how they intend it.
I think she's referring back to her previous comment that the Chatham University in Pittsburgh has a day or so institute.
Oh, okay.
So I think she was just completing that thought.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. I hate to do, there are so many great questions. I want to make sure we're closing on a note. I want to hear from each of the panelists. So we're going to go right to what is the best way. I think we know what folks are going to say. Maybe running for office isn't in your cards, right? Maybe you're just like, I just want to know what the best way is to participate in local government. What is the best way? And I'm curious to hear from each of the panelists. And whatever lucky soul comes off mute first is going to be the first one to go. What is the best way to try to participate in local government?
I'm gonna go first because this is kind of like, it's not I don't want to say it's a pet peeve of mine, but the best way to get involved in local government is see what's already going on, see where you fit into it, and get in that area. I think that something that's happening a lot of is we want to start and try new things, and new is awesome. New is amazing. That's wonderful. But what you might unintentionally be doing is pulling away from resources that are getting work done. And if you want to try your own thing and do it in a silo, then your very important voice, your very real lived experience is going to be part of a conversation that's not being had with all people. Like, be brave, be bold, go into spaces that you might not normally want to go into, and say, hey, this is who I am. This is what matters to me. Like, it takes a level. I walked into a Democratic meeting in Bethlehem, and I said, oh my God, if anybody in Bethlehem is here, I'm so sorry. Listen, I love you guys, seriously. But I talked about what what Bethlehem looks like and the populations in Bethlehem that have been pushed to the margins. And I gently reminded them that Bethlehem has been under Democratic control for 30 years, so you can't blame the Republicans on this one. And if I had decided to start my own thing, then a very real group of people who were taken aback by my statements, but ultimately were like, this is something that needs to be heard, they wouldn't have heard it. And that's how we create change. I know it's really exciting to start a new thing. Be bold, be brave, walk into a space that you normally wouldn't walk into, throw your hat in that conversation. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Rachel. Other folks, what is the best way to participate in local government?
I'll go because I don't want, I think Winnie will be a good last word on this. So I think sort of touching off of what Rachel said, I think start going to public meetings first. Go to your school district meeting, go to your county commissioners meeting, go to your municipality's public meetings. It's tough. A lot of them there is remote ways to access. I know ours are, you can both phone in and they get published onto a YouTube channel. So there are ways to access them and follow what's going on. But I know when I started, if you just went to one meeting, you didn't actually see the flow of how the work was coming through and like seeing projects move through the process. So kind of understanding how each one works and figuring out which one is touching on the issues that are important to you is I think important. And then once you're seeing that, you can see those issues and where is your public comment going to make the most difference. We interact with our audience before and after meetings. So getting to know your officials. And so when you do have an issue, you can talk to them or have meetings with them more easily is a big deal. And then I would say just if you are someone who wants to run, don't feel like you have to wait your turn. The first time I ran against an incumbent. And, I think a lot of people were surprised or offended because it was still his turn. But I had a passion for what I wanted to do and I felt like I was ready and I didn't think I needed to wait. So, do your homework and make sure, you know how to get on the ballot and all of that, but don't feel like you have to wait your turn.
And I'll just echo what both Rachel and Laura said is I think the best way is to just show up, whether that's at the polls. Yes, I got a Winnie clap. Yeah. Whether that's at the polls, whether that's at the meetings, whether that's in your community forums. And to echo what Laura, it's a lot of work. We understand that, and you can't always do it, and it's going to be exhausting. It's going to be emotionally draining, as Winnie said earlier. But like, just showing up is the best way that you can represent yourself and your community and your interests and your desires.
Yeah. That's why I say muted, because I'm always very enthusiastic on this side of the screen. Oh my word. I second everything that my co-panelists have shared before me here. And I guess for me to wrap it all up is when I think of the best way to show up is consistently. Right? Because I think too often like there's that initial like ignition and energy typically like when something happens. Oh, this bridge fell, or this thing, we had this spill, or this happened. I'm like, things are hot for a second. There's a shooting. Things are hot. They're very ephemeral, and that's good and it serves a purpose. However, I would ask that if we're talking about the best way, and don't let the best, be the enemy of good. Do what you can with what you have right now. That's one thing I always remind people. Don't wait to be perfect, no matter what the topic is. Do the best you can with what you got right now. And in that, be consistent. It's like in any relationship that we want to be fruitful, right? Just show up and keep showing up. We're gonna have arguments, we'll have disagreements, but keep showing up and hold me accountable to the things that I said that I was going to do. Like to me, that's the best part of, how to show up in this spaces. Just keep showing up. Yeah.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you all so much. Winnie, Rachel, Laura, Abby, really appreciate you. Thanks to all the attendees and participants that joined us this evening. We know that this is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the impacts that local government has. So please stay tuned for the next year for offerings and guides. And like Winnie said, and Rachel said, everyone said tonight, show up how you can, but please, if there's one thing you can do, I'm going to say, please vote November 7th, get out there. That is definitely something that we can all do. Really appreciate you all. Stay in touch, and a big thank you to our co-sponsors tonight. Their websites are in the chat. We will make sure to follow up with an email with you all with their resources and future offerings. Really appreciate you all. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.